In the year 400 BCE, Jewish exiles began returning to Judea from Babylon. They carried a direct commission from the Persian king to rebuild the ruined city of Jerusalem and its surrounding defensive walls. The newly appointed governor, Nehemiah, organized a massive reconstruction project. He divided the perimeter of the city, assigning specific sections of the wall to different families, local guilds, and community leaders, so they could rebuild the defenses right across from where they lived. The administrative records of this project are preserved in the 3rd and 7th chapters of the Book of Nehemiah. For a modern reader, these chapters look like a dry log of names and precise headcounts of the returning exiles. This data log reveals a specific entry. The text identifies a man named Melatiah the Gibeonite and a returning group of exactly 95 sons of Gibeon. The Gibeonites were not Israelites. They were indigenous Canaanites. According to the foundational laws of the Torah, they were to be completely eradicated from the region 1,000 years earlier. To understand why their presence in Nehemiah is a contradiction, we have to rewind a millennium to the book of Joshua, during the initial Israelite conquest of the hill country of Canaan. The military campaign was governed by a strict wartime mandate known as herem. Herem translates roughly to the ban, and it required the absolute devotion of indigenous Canaanite cities and their populations to complete destruction. This was a directive rooted in theological jurisprudence. This mandate was a targeted measure to eliminate local religious syncretism and prevent Israelites from adopting these practices. Gibeon was squarely inside the central hill country territory slated for destruction, placing the city directly under the jurisdiction of the ban. Yet, as the Persian-era records in Nehemiah show, they escaped this mandate. They stayed in the land, survived the Babylonian exile, and finally assimilated into the Jewish community. The Gibeonites survived by executing a highly calculated exploit of Israelite legal codes. The Israelite invasion began with 2 major engagements: the total destruction of Jericho, followed immediately by a temporary, exposing defeat at the city of Ai. Before the battle at Ai, the primary reaction of the local Canaanites to Israel's approaching army was paralyzing fear. We see this in the earlier accounts of figures like Rahab. But the loss at Ai showed the locals that Israel was vulnerable. This caused a rapid geopolitical shift in the region, as fear dissolved into offensive military action. This tactical map tracks northern and southern kings abandoning isolation, rapidly merging into unified military blocs to strike the Israelites. While the others mobilized for a brute force confrontation, the Gibeonites detached, charting a distinct, solitary vector toward the Israelite camp at Gilgal. They recognized that meeting Israel on the battlefield would result in their annihilation. Instead, they opted for an asymmetrical diplomatic strategy based on internal Israelite intelligence. That intelligence centered on Deuteronomy chapter 20, the foundational legal text governing Israel's rules of engagement for the Canaanite campaign. This logic tree breaks down the law. If a city is strictly inside the promised borders, leave no survivors. But verses 10 through 15 contain a critical loophole. If a city is outside those borders, very far from you, Israel must first offer peace. For any group facing the advancing Israelite army, proving geographic distance was the only legal mechanism available to bypass the mandate of destruction. This raises a question. How did an isolated Canaanite population gain access to the internal legal architecture of the Pentateuch? The Pentateuch refers to the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, containing the civil and military codes given to Moses. The biblical text never identifies their informant. However, their execution of the loophole proves they understood the exact geographic parameters of the law. But knowing the law wasn't enough to save them. To legally trigger the peace clause, the Gibeonites had to manufacture empirical evidence that they had traveled from a distant country. A Gibeonite delegation arrived at the Israelite camp in Gilgal, presenting themselves as ambassadors from a far-off land. To prove their origin, they presented physical evidence: worn-out sacks on their donkeys, torn wineskins, and bread that was dry and crumbling to dust. This visual comparison shows how every piece of this degraded evidence mapped to the legal requirements of Deuteronomy 20. The extreme wear and tear served as the proof necessary to verify their distant status. Joshua and the Israelite elders carefully examined these physical provisions, but as Joshua 9:14 records, they made a procedural error. They did not ask counsel from the Lord. Relying entirely on the forged physical evidence, the Israelites formally ratified a peace treaty, swearing an oath by the God of Israel to let the delegation live. By prioritizing empirical observation over divine consultation, the Israelite leaders legally locked themselves into protecting the very population they were commanded to destroy. The deception held for exactly 3 days. At the end of that short window, the Israelites discovered the Gibeonites were actually their immediate neighbors living deep inside the territory. A public backlash erupted. The Israelite congregation immediately murmured against their leaders for falling for the trick. But they could not simply tear up the treaty and execute the Canaanites. In the context of the ancient Near East, formal covenants were considered inviolable. The theological stakes were high. Breaking a solemn oath sworn in the name of Yahweh carried a far heavier divine penalty than failing to execute the Canaanite ban. As a result, the survival of the Gibeonites was now guaranteed and protected by the exact same legal system originally designed to eradicate them. Joshua responded with a punitive measure. Because of their deception, he cursed the Gibeonites to serve as perpetual manual laborers, designating them as cutters of wood and drawers of water. But he assigned this labor to a highly specific location. They were ordered to serve the congregation and maintain the altar of the Lord. By binding them to the daily functions of the altar, Joshua placed these outsiders at the functional center of Israelite religious life. Over the next 10 centuries, their proximity to the central sanctuary led to their assimilation into the community's religious and civic identity, which brings us back to the entry in the book of Nehemiah. When the Babylonians eventually conquered Jerusalem, the descendants of the Gibeonites were exiled alongside the Jews. Decades later, 95 of those descendants willingly chose to return to Judea to help rebuild the walls of the city. A geopolitical exploit rooted in physical deception and an administrative failure forged a 1,000-year pathway for a condemned people to become participants in the family of Israel.